Welcome to the Antarctic ice shelf in the year 1915, aboard the ship Endurance, commanded by Sir Ernest Shackleton, when the vessel has been trapped in pack ice for months during the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. When the Antarctic winter is approaching and will bring months of continuous darkness with temperatures dropping to 50 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. And when the 28 men aboard must prepare for the brutal ordeal of surviving the polar night while their ship is slowly crushed by the relentless pressure of moving ice. For the next few hours, we will explore how polar explorers actually navigated Antarctic ice during the long polar night, examining the navigation techniques that allowed them to maintain position and direction in complete darkness, the survival methods that kept them alive in the most hostile environment on Earth, the psychological challenges of enduring months of darkness and isolation, and the leadership and teamwork that determined whether expeditions succeeded or whether entire crews perished in the frozen wasteland. If you enjoy these detailed explorations of extreme survival and human endurance in the face of nature's harshest conditions, please like and subscribe to support our channel. Our story begins in late March 1915 as the Antarctic autumn transitions toward winter and the hours of daylight rapidly diminish. The Endurance has been locked in pack ice since January, approximately 85 miles from land, drifting slowly with the ice pack in the Weddell Sea. Shackleton's original plan to cross the Antarctic continent on foot is now impossible, and the expedition's objective has changed from exploration to survival. A crew member named Thomas Ord-Lees, the expedition's motor expert and stores officer, stands on the ice beside the trapped ship, watching the sunset on what will be one of the last days with significant daylight for the next 4 months. Ord-Lees is 39 years old, a former Royal Marine who joined the expedition seeking adventure, and who is now facing the reality that adventure in Antarctica means survival in conditions more extreme than anything he experienced in military service. The sun hovers on the northern horizon, the direction that in the southern hemisphere represents the sun's path, casting long shadows across the ice and painting the sky in shades of orange, red, and purple. The beauty is stunning, but also ominous, as each sunset brings the expedition closer to the polar night when the sun will not rise at all for weeks. Shackleton has assembled the crew for a meeting to discuss preparations for the coming darkness. All 28 men gather in the ship's wardroom, a confined space heated by a coal stove. Cramped, but relatively warm compared to the brutal cold outside where temperatures are already dropping below zero Fahrenheit even during the brief daylight hours. Shackleton addresses the crew with the directness and honesty that characterizes his leadership style. "Gentlemen, we face a challenge that will test every one of us. The polar night approaches. We will spend months in darkness, in cold that can kill in minutes if we're unprepared, trapped on ice that is constantly moving and that may destroy our ship. Some of you may wonder if we'll survive. I assure you we will, but only if we maintain discipline, maintain our routines, and work together. The darkness itself is perhaps our greatest challenge. Men can go mad in perpetual night, can lose sense of time, can become depressed and hopeless, can abandon the will to survive. We will combat this through routine, through keeping busy, through maintaining as much normality as possible, despite abnormal circumstances." This speech reflects Shackleton's understanding of the psychological dimension of polar survival. The physical challenges, the cold, the limited food, the danger from ice, are severe, but manageable with proper equipment and technique. The psychological challenges, the darkness, the isolation, the monotony, the fear, can be equally deadly and require different countermeasures. The crew's preparations for the polar night involve multiple dimensions: physical modifications to the ship and the ice camp, development of navigation and monitoring systems for tracking the ice drift, establishment of routines and schedules to maintain psychological health, and stockpiling of resources to sustain the crew through the dark months. Ord-Lees is assigned responsibility for organizing the stores and for managing the daily rations. This is a critical role. The expedition has finite food supplies, and these must be carefully managed to last through the winter and potentially beyond if rescue does not come when spring arrives. He conducts a thorough inventory of available supplies. Approximately 15,000 pounds of various food items, including pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat and fat developed specifically for polar expeditions, biscuits, flour, sugar, tea, cocoa, tobacco, and various canned goods. There are also supplies of coal for heating, kerosene for lamps, and various equipment and materials for repairs and for survival on the ice. Based on 28 men consuming approximately 4,000 calories per day each, the high caloric requirement reflecting both the cold environment and the physical work required. Audleys calculates that the supplies should last approximately 8 to 10 months with careful rationing. This is adequate for surviving the winter. But it leaves minimal margin for error if the ice does not break up in spring or if rescue is delayed. The ship itself must be prepared for months of darkness and extreme cold. The Endurance is a wooden ship, approximately 144 feet long, specially reinforced for ice navigation, but not designed to survive being frozen into pack ice indefinitely. The crew has already adapted the ship for winter conditions, sealing gaps to reduce heat loss, organizing living spaces for maximum efficiency, establishing routines for maintaining cleanliness and order in the confined quarters. But preparing for the darkness requires additional measures. Navigation in complete darkness requires instruments and techniques that differ from daylight navigation. The crew must be able to determine their position despite having no visual reference to landmarks, must be able to track the ice's movement and drift direction, must be able to maintain awareness of their location relative to land and to open water. The primary navigation tool for determining latitude, north-south position, is the sextant, an instrument that measures the angle between celestial objects and the horizon. During the brief periods when stars are visible, before and after the polar night, the navigator can use the sextant to measure star positions and calculate latitude from standard astronomical tables. But during the polar night itself, when the sun never rises and when clouds often obscure the stars, astronomical navigation becomes impossible for extended periods. Alternative methods must be employed. One method is dead reckoning, calculating position based on known starting position, estimated drift direction and speed, and elapsed time. If the ice is drifting northwest at approximately half a mile per day, a rough average based on observations before darkness fell, then after 10 days, the ice should have moved approximately 5 miles northwest. This method is imprecise, and errors accumulate over time, but it provides rough position estimates when better methods are unavailable. Another method is monitoring ice pressure and movement patterns. The pack ice is not static, but is constantly moving in response to ocean currents, wind, and the internal pressures created by ice sheets grinding against each other. Experienced ice navigators can interpret ice movements and can make educated guesses about drift patterns. The expedition's navigator, Captain Frank Worsley, is an extraordinarily skilled navigator who has an almost intuitive sense for ship position and for ice behavior. He establishes a routine of taking astronomical observations whenever conditions permit, of maintaining careful dead reckoning calculations, of monitoring ice pressures and movements, and of recording all observations in detailed logs that allow him to reconstruct the ship's drift pattern. But navigation during the polar night requires more than just determining position. It requires understanding the ice environment, identifying dangers, and making tactical decisions about whether to remain with the ship or to prepare for abandoning it if the ice pressure becomes too severe. As the last daylight fades and the polar night descends, Audleys and the rest of the crew settle into the routines that will govern their lives for the next 4 months. These routines are carefully designed to maintain physical and psychological health despite the extraordinary conditions. The day, though day becomes a somewhat meaningless concept when there is no daylight, is divided into watches and work periods. Men wake at specific times, eat meals at specific times, perform assigned tasks at specific times. This structure provides a framework that prevents the disorientation and psychological deterioration that can occur when time becomes fluid and undifferentiated. Work assignments include maintaining the ship, pumping out water that seeps through the ice-damaged hull, repairing equipment, monitoring coal consumption, and managing the heating system. Maintaining the ice camp, clearing snow, maintaining observation posts, caring for the sled dogs that the expedition brought for transportation. Scientific observations, recording weather conditions, ice movements, temperatures, wildlife observations, and recreational activities, sports and games on the ice, when weather permits, reading, music, theatrical performances. The recreational activities are not luxuries, but are essential for psychological survival. Men need mental stimulation, need social interaction, need diversions from the constant awareness of danger and discomfort. Shackleton understands this and encourages such activities, often participating himself, to build morale and solidarity. As the polar night deepens and weeks pass without sunrise, the psychological strain becomes evident. Some men adapt well to the darkness. They maintain positive attitudes, remain active and engaged, contribute to group morale. Others struggle. They become withdrawn, irritable, depressed. Shackleton monitors the crew's psychological states carefully and intervenes when necessary, reassigning tasks, providing encouragement, sometimes simply listening to concerns and fears. Lees himself experiences the psychological challenges. He writes in his diary, "The darkness is oppressive in ways I never anticipated. Not just the absence of light, but the sense that the sun has abandoned us, that we exist in a liminal space between life and death. I force myself to maintain routines, to complete my assigned tasks, to interact with others, even when I want only to withdraw into myself." This honest acknowledgement of psychological struggle is common in polar expedition accounts. The heroic narratives often emphasize physical endurance and courage, but the private writings reveal that the psychological dimension was equally challenging and that maintaining mental health required conscious effort and mutual support. The Antarctic night is not completely dark. There are periods when the moon is above the horizon, creating a dim twilight that allows some visibility. There are also the aurora australis, southern lights, spectacular displays of colored light created by solar particles interacting with Earth's magnetic field, providing both illumination and visual beauty that helps combat the oppressive darkness. And occasionally there are storms, blizzards with wind speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, creating whiteout conditions, even in darkness, battering the ship and the ice camp, demonstrating the raw power of Antarctic weather and reminding the crew that they are at the mercy of forces they cannot control. Through all of this, the ice continues its relentless work. The pack ice surrounding the Endurance is in constant motion, driven by ocean currents and wind, creating enormous pressures as ice sheets grind against each other. The ship creaks and groans under the pressure, timbers bending, occasionally cracking, the sounds ominous reminders that the ice could at any moment crush the vessel completely. Shackleton and Worsley monitor the ice pressures carefully, aware that they may need to order the crew to abandon ship with minimal warning if the pressure becomes too severe. Preparations are made for this possibility. Essential supplies are organized for quick removal. Sledges are prepared for hauling equipment across the ice. Escape routes are identified and marked. As we follow Lees and the Endurance's crew through the first weeks of the polar night, we witness the beginning of an ordeal that will test human endurance to its limits and that will demonstrate both the remarkable capabilities and the fundamental vulnerabilities of human beings facing nature's most extreme environment. During the rare clear nights when clouds part and stars become visible, Captain Frank Worsley emerges from the ship to conduct astronomical observations that will allow him to determine the Endurance's position with reasonable accuracy. Let us follow Worsley through the process of celestial navigation in Antarctic darkness, observing the techniques and the challenges of this essential skill. Worsley is a New Zealander, 35 years old, who has spent his entire adult life at sea and who has developed navigation skills that border on the extraordinary. He has an almost supernatural ability to dead reckon, to estimate ship position based on course, speed, and elapsed time. And his astronomical navigation is equally precise when conditions allow observations. Tonight is one of the rare nights when conditions are favorable. The sky is clear, the wind is relatively calm at perhaps 20 miles per hour, quite moderate by Antarctic standards, and the temperature is approximately 15 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, cold but not dangerously so for brief exposure with proper clothing. Worsley dresses carefully for the observation session. Antarctic cold is deadly, and even brief exposure requires multiple layers of specialized clothing. He wears wool underwear, wool shirts and trousers, a thick wool sweater, windproof outer garments made from Burberry gabardine fabric, wool mittens with leather outer mitts, a wool balaclava covering his head and neck, and thick boots lined with fur. The total weight of clothing is perhaps 25 pounds, and the bulk is considerable, but the insulation is essential. At 15 below zero, exposed skin can develop frostbite within minutes, and inadequate clothing can lead to hypothermia that kills within hours. He also carries his navigation instruments, a sextant for measuring celestial angles, a chronometer, an extremely accurate timepiece essential for determining longitude, a notebook and pencil for recording observations, and a lantern for illumination. The sextant is a precision instrument, approximately 8 inches in radius, made from brass and optical glass, capable of measuring angles to within a few seconds of arc. The instrument works by using mirrors to bring two images, one of a celestial object, one of the horizon, into alignment, with the angle between them readable from a graduated scale. But using the sextant in Antarctic darkness presents unique challenges. The normal technique requires a visible horizon, a clear line between sea and sky that serves as the reference for measuring angles. In polar darkness, the horizon is often invisible, requiring alternative techniques. One alternative is using an artificial horizon, a container of liquid, often mercury, that creates a perfectly level, reflecting surface. The navigator measures the angle between the celestial object and its reflection in the liquid, then divides by 2 to obtain the actual angle above the horizon. This technique is less accurate than using the natural horizon, but is usable when the natural horizon is invisible. Worsley sets up his artificial horizon, a shallow tray containing mercury that he has kept from freezing by storing it inside his clothing, where body heat maintains liquid temperature. He positions the tray carefully on a level surface of ice, protecting it from wind with a canvas screen. The Antarctic night sky is spectacular when visible. The stars are extraordinarily bright due to the clear, dry air and the absence of light pollution. The Southern Cross constellation is prominent, along with other southern sky features unfamiliar to observers from the northern hemisphere. Worsley's primary target for observation is the star Canopus, the second brightest star in the night sky, prominent in the southern sky, excellent for calculating latitude in southern latitudes. He will also observe several other stars to verify his calculations and to improve accuracy through multiple observations. He positions himself near the artificial horizon, sextant in hand, and begins the observation process. The technique requires looking through the sextant's telescope at Canopus while simultaneously viewing its reflection in the Mercury surface below. He adjusts the sextant's movable arm until the direct view of the star and its reflection appear to touch, indicating that the measured angle is correct. Reading the angle from the sextant scale in near darkness is challenging. Worsley must use his lantern to illuminate the scale without ruining his night vision, or without allowing the light to interfere with seeing the star. He shields the lantern carefully, using it only for brief moments to read the scale. The measured angle is 63 degrees, 42 minutes. Worsley records this in his notebook, along with the exact time from his chronometer, critical for longitude calculations. But the work is not complete. The raw measurement must be corrected for various factors: the height of the observer's eye above the surface, affecting the apparent horizon position; atmospheric refraction, the bending of light by the atmosphere; the Earth's curvature, and several other technical corrections. These corrections are looked up in navigation tables, thick books of pre-calculated values that Worsley carries. Working by lantern light in the intense cold, Worsley performs the calculations. His hands, even in thick mittens, become cold and clumsy within minutes. The pencil is difficult to grip. The notebook pages are stiff from cold. The mathematical calculations require concentration that is challenged by discomfort and by the need to work quickly before exposure becomes dangerous. After approximately 15 minutes of observation and calculation, Worsley has determined the ship's latitude, approximately 69 degrees, 5 minutes south. This matches reasonably well with his dead reckoning calculations, confirming that the ice is drifting in the direction and at the speed he estimated. But latitude alone is insufficient for complete position determination. Longitude, east-west position, is also required. Determining longitude requires measuring the exact time when a celestial object reaches a specific position, typically when it crosses the local meridian, the line running from north to south through the observer's position, then comparing this local time to Greenwich Mean Time from the chronometer. The time difference indicates how far east or west the observer is from Greenwich, England. Approximately 15 degrees of longitude for each hour of time difference. This technique requires extremely accurate timekeeping, which is why chronometers, mechanical timepieces accurate to within a few seconds per day, were essential for navigation. Worsley's chronometer is one of the expedition's most valuable instruments, carefully maintained and protected from temperature extremes that could affect its accuracy. He checks the chronometer regularly against astronomical observations when possible, verifying that it maintains accurate time. Tonight's observations, combined with chronometer time, allow Worsley to calculate longitude, approximately 51 degrees west. Combined with the latitude, this gives the complete position, 69 degrees 5 minutes south, 51 degrees west, approximately 80 miles from the Antarctic Peninsula, drifting slowly westward and northward with the pack ice. This position information is essential for multiple reasons. It allows the expedition to know how far they are from potential rescue routes, allows them to estimate when they might drift into open water where the ship could potentially break free, or where they might need to abandon ship and attempt to reach land by traveling over the ice, and provides data about ocean currents and ice drift patterns that could be valuable for future expeditions. But astronomical navigation has severe limitations in Antarctic conditions. Cloud cover often obscures the stars for weeks at a time. The polar night itself means that the sun, the primary object for daytime navigation, is not available for months. The intense cold makes outdoor observations brief and difficult. Equipment can freeze or be damaged by the extreme conditions. As Worsley completes his observations and returns to the warmth of the ship, he must accept that these astronomical position fixes will be rare during the winter months, and that the expedition will depend primarily on dead reckoning, on estimated drift patterns, for position information during most of the polar night. Back inside the ship, Worsley enters the night's observations into the ship's log and updates his navigation charts. The charts show the Endurance's drift pattern over the months since becoming trapped in ice, an erratic path trending generally northward and westward, driven by the ocean currents beneath the ice and by the wind patterns above. The drift is slow, rarely more than a mile per day, sometimes as little as a few hundred yards, but it is relentless. The ice and the ship move whether the crew wants them to or not, carrying the expedition gradually toward either rescue or disaster, depending on the drift's ultimate direction. Worsley shares the position information with Shackleton, and they discuss the implications. At the current drift rate, the ship might reach the edge of the pack ice in perhaps 4 to 6 months, sometime in the Antarctic spring, when increasing daylight and rising temperatures begin to break up the ice pack. But reaching the ice edge while still aboard the ship requires that the Endurance survive the ice pressures for those months. And even if the ship does reach open water, it is so damaged from months of ice pressure that it may not be seaworthy, may sink if the ice releases it. These uncertainties, the unknown drift pattern, the unknown ice pressures, the unknown condition of the ship, the unknown possibilities for rescue, create constant psychological stress. The crew must live with the awareness that their survival depends on factors they cannot control and can barely predict. But Worsley's navigation skills provide some reassurance. Knowing their position, knowing how they're drifting, having some basis for estimating future positions, this knowledge is psychologically valuable, even when it doesn't change the physical situation. Uncertainty is often more distressing than bad news, and Worsley's navigational work reduces uncertainty, providing the crew with information that helps them understand their situation, even when they cannot change it. As the weeks of darkness continue and the Antarctic winter deepens, Worsley continues his astronomical observations whenever conditions permit, maintaining the navigational record that will later prove essential when the Endurance is finally crushed by ice and the crew must navigate across ice and open ocean to reach safety.
As the Antarctic winter progresses and August arrives, late winter in the southern hemisphere, the ice pressure on the Endurance increases to catastrophic levels. The pack ice is driven by ocean currents and is compressed by wind patterns, creating enormous forces as ice sheets miles in extent push against each other, with the trapped ship caught in the middle. Let us follow the crew through the crisis when the ice finally overcomes the ship, observing both the physical destruction and the response that will determine whether the crew survives. The signs of increasing pressure have been building for weeks. The ship creaks and groans constantly as ice presses against the hull. Timbers that were straight weeks ago are now visibly bent. Seams between planks are opening, allowing water to enter the ship faster than the pumps can remove it. The ship's structure is slowly being crushed, and everyone knows that total failure is approaching. Shackleton orders continuous watches, men stationed both inside and outside the ship to monitor the pressure and to provide warning if the ship begins to break up. The outdoor watch is brutal duty, standing on the ice in temperatures approaching 40 below zero, in darkness broken only by lanterns, listening to the ominous sounds of ice grinding
and ship timbers failing, knowing that at any moment the ship could be crushed completely. Ord-Lees is on watch on the night of October 24th, 1915, when the final crisis arrives. He stands on the ice beside the ship, huddled against the cold, listening to sounds that have become increasingly alarming over the past hours. Not just the normal creaking, but sharp cracks like gunshots, the sound of timber breaking, the groaning of metal fittings being twisted beyond their design limits. Suddenly, there is a sound like an explosion. A massive timber deep in the ship's structure has failed under pressure. Ord-Lees immediately sounds the alarm, a handbell that brings the crew rushing from below decks, scrambling to assess the damage and to prepare for potential evacuation. Shackleton appears within seconds, calm despite the crisis, immediately taking charge. "Report," he demands of the ship's carpenter, Harry McNish, who has gone below to inspect the damage. McNish emerges looking grim. "The beams are failing, sir. The port side is stove in. Water's coming in faster than we can pump. Shall not last the night." This is the moment Shackleton has been preparing for, the moment when the ship that has been their shelter and their home must be abandoned, when the crew must transition to survival on the ice with only what they can salvage. "All hands," Shackleton's voice carries across the ice. "Begin emergency evacuation. Priorities: food, fuel, tents, sleeping bags, navigational equipment, medical supplies. We abandon ship within the hour." The next hour is controlled chaos. 28 men work frantically to remove essential supplies from a ship that is visibly breaking apart, creating stacks of equipment and supplies on the ice, organizing sledges for hauling the supplies if they need to move camps. Ord-Lees coordinates the food removal. He has spent months organizing the stores and knows exactly where everything is located. He works with a team of men to remove the most calorie-dense foods first, the pemmican, the sugar, the chocolate, then the other supplies in order of importance. The removal is physically brutal. The supplies are heavy. Pemmican tins weigh perhaps 5 pounds each, and they need hundreds of them. The work must be done in extreme cold and in darkness, moving through a ship that is groaning and cracking ominously, knowing that at any moment the structure could collapse completely. Some supplies are left behind. There simply isn't time or capacity to remove everything. Books, clothing, luxuries, even some foods must be abandoned. The decisions about what to save and what to leave are agonizing. Each abandoned item represents potential survival value, but necessity requires prioritization. By dawn, though dawn brings only slight twilight as the polar night is only now ending, the evacuation is complete. The essential supplies are on the ice, organized into camps approximately 100 yards from the ship. The crew watches as the Endurance, the ship that carried them to Antarctica, that has been their home for more than a year, continues to be crushed by the relentless ice. The destruction is spectacular and terrible. The hull timbers splinter with sounds like rifle fire. The masts tilt at crazy angles as the deck beneath them buckles. The stern lifts as the bow is forced downward by ice pressure. The ship that was built to withstand ice pressures is being destroyed by forces that exceed any engineer's worst-case scenarios. For several days, the Endurance remains partially visible, wedged in the ice, slowly breaking apart. Then, on November 21st, the ice pressure finally drives the ship under the surface. The Endurance sinks beneath the ice, leaving the crew stranded on the pack ice, hundreds of miles from land, with limited supplies, facing the Antarctic spring when the ice will begin to break up. The loss of the ship fundamentally changes the expedition's situation. Previously, they were aboard a damaged but intact vessel that provided shelter, organization, and the psychological comfort of having a home in the hostile environment. Now they are refugees on the ice, living in tents, dependent entirely on what they saved from the ship, with no shelter beyond what they can create from tents and ice. But the loss of the ship also clarifies their situation and their objectives. Shackleton immediately establishes new priorities: survive on the ice while the pack ice drifts. Prepare to launch the ship's boats when the ice breaks up in spring. Navigate to the nearest land, South Georgia Island, approximately 800 miles away. And ultimately, reach rescue. The navigation challenges multiply now that the crew is camped on drifting ice rather than aboard a ship. Worsley must continue tracking their position and drift, but now he must do so while living in a tent, with limited access to instruments, with no stable platform for observations. The camp itself must be organized to facilitate survival and navigation. Shackleton designates the largest tent as the command tent, where he, Worsley, and the other officers conduct planning and where navigational equipment is stored. Other tents house the crew in groups, organized to maintain morale and to ensure that compatible personalities are grouped together. The ice camp must also include provisions for monitoring the ice conditions. The pack ice is not solid, but is a jumble of ice sheets that shift and crack constantly. Open leads of water can appear with minimal warning, potentially separating parts of the camp or creating hazards that must be crossed or circumnavigated. Crew members are assigned to walk the perimeter of the camp regularly, checking for cracks, for pressure ridges, for any signs that the ice is becoming unstable. This monitoring is essential. The crew must be prepared to relocate the camp quickly if the ice beneath them begins to break up. Navigation by dead reckoning now requires estimating the ice drift, not just in speed but in direction, accounting for wind and currents, maintaining awareness of their position relative to land masses and to potential rescue routes. Worsley maintains detailed logs of the drift, creating a record that shows the chaotic, unpredictable path of the ice as it moves through the Weddell Sea. The psychological impact of losing the ship is significant. Some men are relieved. The constant stress of wondering when the ship would finally be crushed is over, replaced by the clarity of knowing they are now committed to survival on ice and to eventual boat journey. Others are demoralized. The ship represented safety and home, and its loss makes their vulnerability starkly apparent. Shackleton works constantly to maintain morale, establishing routines, organizing work details, ensuring that men remain active and engaged. He maintains the discipline and organization that prevent the psychological deterioration that would make physical survival impossible. As the Antarctic spring arrives and daylight begins to return, the crew faces new challenges and new opportunities. The returning light allows better navigation, allows them to see ice conditions and hazards, provides psychological relief from the darkness. But the warming temperatures also mean that the ice is beginning to break up, creating both the possibility of launching their boats and the danger of being caught on fragmenting ice. By April 1916, the pack ice has broken up sufficiently that Shackleton orders the boats launched. The crew has salvaged 3 boats from the Endurance: the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. Sturdy wooden boats, approximately 20 to 23 feet long, designed for ships' lifeboats, but now serving as the crew's only transportation across the treacherous waters between their ice camp and the nearest land. Let us follow the crew through the desperate boat journey toward Elephant Island, observing the navigation techniques used to guide small boats through ice-filled Antarctic seas. The 28 men are divided among the 3 boats, approximately 9 men per boat, along with their share of supplies and equipment. The boats are heavily loaded, sitting low in the water, vulnerable to swamping by waves or by collisions with ice. Worsley is in command of the Dudley Docker, while Shackleton commands the James Caird and Captain Hubert Hudson commands the Stancomb Wills. The boats must stay together. If separated, the crews might never find each other in the vast expanse of the Antarctic Ocean. Navigation in these conditions is extraordinarily challenging. The boats are small and unstable, lacking any of the navigational aids of a proper ship. They carry a compass, a sextant, and chronometers. But using these instruments in a small boat, being tossed by waves and surrounded by ice, is nearly impossible. Worsley attempts to take a sun sight using the sextant, but the boat's motion makes it almost impossible to get a stable view. The boat rises on a wave, creating a high angle to the sun, then drops into a trough, creating a low angle. The rolling motion adds lateral movement. Getting an accurate measurement requires catching the brief moment at the top of a wave when the boat is momentarily level. But even then, the accuracy is poor compared to observations from a stable ship. He manages to get a rough measurement that suggests their latitude is approximately 61 degrees south. But he cannot be confident in the measurement's accuracy. It could easily be off by several miles, possibly more. The compass provides more reliable directional information. The boats are navigating generally north-northeast toward Elephant Island, which Worsley estimates is approximately 100 miles distant. But pack ice forces constant course changes. Leads of open water dictate routes. Ice flows must be circumnavigated. The direct course is almost never possible. The ice navigation requires constant vigilance. The lookouts in each boat watch for ice hazards, floating ice that could damage the wooden hulls, ice floes that could crush the boats if they become trapped. Icebergs, often massive, unstable, capable of overturning suddenly. Ordleys, serving as a lookout in the James Caird,
Calls out hazards constantly. Ice ahead, 30 yards.
large floe to port, open lead to starboard. Shackleton steers the boat through the maze of ice, making split-second decisions about routes, about risks, about whether to push through narrow leads or to backtrack and find alternative routes. The decisions are critical. A wrong choice could result in the boat being crushed, or the crew being forced to abandon the boat onto ice and to attempt walking across unstable, fragmenting ice floes. The cold is brutal. The Antarctic autumn means temperatures hovering around freezing, with spray from the waves soaking the men constantly. Wet clothing in near-freezing temperatures creates hypothermia risk, and there is no way to dry clothing or to warm up beyond the minimal heat provided by body heat under sleeping bags and tents when they camp on ice floes at night. The night camps are desperate affairs. The crew must find ice floes large enough and stable enough to support the boats and the men, must unload sufficient equipment to set up minimal camps, must try to sleep despite cold and wet and fear. Then they must reload everything in the morning and continue the journey. After 7 days of this brutal existence, 7 days of navigating through ice, of enduring cold and wet and limited food rations, of rowing for hours when wind doesn't allow sailing, the boats finally reach open water beyond the pack ice. Elephant Island is visible ahead, approximately 20 miles distant. The final approach to Elephant Island is complicated by the island's geography and by deteriorating weather. The island is mountainous and largely ice-covered, with steep cliffs dropping directly into the ocean in many locations. Finding a landing site where the boats can safely approach and where the crew can establish a camp requires careful navigation along the island's coast. Worsley navigates by visual piloting, observing the coastline, identifying features, comparing the observed features to the rough charts they possess, based on earlier expeditions' observations, looking for protected bays or beaches where landing might be possible. The search is increasingly desperate as weather deteriorates. A storm is building, wind increasing, waves rising, visibility decreasing. If they cannot find a landing site soon, they may be driven back out to sea or may be smashed against the rocky coastline. Finally, after hours of searching the coast, they identify a possible landing site, a narrow beach of rock and ice, protected partially by offshore rocks that create some shelter from the waves. It is not ideal. The beach is exposed to wind and will be swept by storms, but it is the best option available, and the deteriorating weather means they cannot continue searching. The landing is difficult and dangerous. The boats must approach through heavy surf, must be timed to ride waves onto the beach without being overturned or smashed against rocks. Several men are thrown into the frigid water during the landing, creating immediate hypothermia risk. But all 3 boats eventually make it ashore, and all 28 men survive the landing. For the first time in over 16 months, they stand on solid land rather than on ice or in boats. The psychological relief is enormous. Solid land represents stability, safety, a foundation that ice could never provide. But Elephant Island is far from safe. The island is uninhabited, is not on any shipping routes, and the likelihood of rescue finding them here is essentially zero. They have escaped immediate death from the ice and the sea, but they are still hundreds of miles from rescue, still facing starvation as their supplies run low, still in desperate need of reaching civilization. Shackleton immediately begins planning the next phase, a small boat voyage across 800 miles of the Southern Ocean to South Georgia Island, where there is a whaling station and the possibility of rescue. This voyage will be one of the greatest small boat journeys in maritime history and will require navigation of extraordinary precision to find a small island in a vast ocean. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton, Worsley, and 4 other men, Tom Crean, Harry McNish, Timothy McCarthy, and John Vincent, set out from Elephant Island in the James Caird, the largest and most seaworthy of the 3 boats, on an 800-mile voyage across the Southern Ocean to South Georgia Island. Let us follow this epic journey, observing how Worsley navigates across one of the world's most treacherous oceans in a 22-foot boat with minimal instruments and under conditions that would challenge even modern vessels. The James Caird has been modified for the voyage. McNish the carpenter has built a partial decking over the boat using salvaged wood and canvas. creating a small sheltered area and reducing the risk of the boat swamping in heavy seas. The boat carries ballast, rocks and shingle from the beach, to improve stability, supplies for approximately 1 month, though the voyage should take less than 2 weeks if all goes well, and the essential navigation instruments, sextant, chronometer, compass, and nautical tables. The voyage's success depends entirely on Worsley's ability to navigate accurately enough to find South Georgia Island, a target approximately 100 miles long but only about 25 miles wide, in an ocean that extends for thousands of miles in all directions. Missing the island to either side means sailing past it into the open Atlantic, with no other land for thousands of miles, almost certain death for the crew. The navigation must be accomplished under nearly impossible conditions. The boat is in constant motion, rising and falling on waves that sometimes exceed 40 feet, rolling in heavy seas, providing no stable platform for observations. Worsley must conduct celestial navigation despite these conditions, must maintain accurate dead reckoning despite having no modern instruments for measuring speed or drift, must compensate for currents and winds that are poorly charted in these remote waters. The first several days of the voyage bring storms, typical for the Southern Ocean, where weather systems circle the globe unimpeded by landmasses, generating winds and waves that are among the most severe in the world. The James Caird is repeatedly struck by waves, the crew is soaked constantly by spray and by waves breaking over the boat. The conditions are so severe that cooking hot food is almost impossible. Worsley attempts to take sun sights whenever brief breaks in the clouds allow the sun to be visible. The technique requires standing in the cramped, heaving boat, bracing himself against the motion, trying to catch the sun's image in the sextant, while simultaneously catching a glimpse of the horizon, making the measurement during the brief seconds when both are visible. On the 4th day of the voyage, Worsley manages to get what he judges to be a reasonably accurate sun sight. The measurement suggests they are at approximately 57 degrees south latitude, roughly on the correct latitude for South Georgia, but still several hundred miles east of the island. But Worsley cannot get an accurate longitude measurement. Determining longitude requires precise time observations, which require clear views of celestial objects for extended periods, conditions that the weather simply does not permit. He must rely on dead reckoning for east-west position, estimating their westward progress based on wind direction and estimated boat speed. The boat speed is difficult to estimate accurately. In calm conditions, experienced sailors can estimate speed reasonably well by observing how quickly floating objects pass the boat, by feeling the boat's movement through the water, by various techniques developed through experience. But in storm conditions with massive waves, with the boat alternately surfing down wave faces and climbing up wave backs, speed estimation is highly uncertain. Worsley estimates they are making perhaps 60 to 80 miles per day towards South Georgia, but he acknowledges that this estimate could easily be off by 20% or more. Currents could be helping or hindering their progress. The constant course changes required to handle heavy seas mean they are not traveling in a straight line. The psychological pressure of navigation responsibility is enormous. Worsley knows that the survival of all 6 men depends on his ability to find a small island in a vast ocean. Any significant navigation error, mistaking their position by even 50 miles, could result in missing the island and sailing to their deaths in the Atlantic. On the 9th day of the voyage, during a brief period of clearer weather, Worsley obtains good sun sights that confirm their latitude is correct and that suggests they have traveled approximately 400 miles from Elephant Island. If his dead reckoning is accurate, South Georgia should be approximately 350 miles ahead, perhaps 3 to 4 more days of sailing. But a day later, the conditions deteriorate again. A severe storm brings winds that Worsley estimates at 60 to 70 miles per hour, waves that tower above the small boat, conditions so severe that all the crew can do is hold on and try to prevent the boat from capsizing. At one point, a massive wave, Worsley later estimates it was 40 to 50 feet high, breaks over the stern of the boat, nearly swamping them. The crew bails frantically, throwing water over the sides with any container available, fighting to keep the boat from being overwhelmed. Shackleton, in command of the boat, makes the decision to run before the storm rather than trying to maintain course. Survival takes precedence over navigation. For the next 24 hours, they sail roughly northward, driven by the storm, unable to maintain their intended course towards South Georgia. When the storm finally moderates and Worsley can take observations again, he discovers that the storm has driven them approximately 50 miles north of their intended course. They have also made good progress westward, and his calculations suggest that South Georgia is now perhaps 150 miles ahead, tantalizingly close but still invisible beyond the horizon. The final days of the voyage are a race against time and dwindling supplies. The fresh water supply is nearly exhausted. The barrels have leaked, contaminated by salt water. The food supplies are running low. The men are exhausted from constant cold, wet, and the physical and psychological stress of the voyage. On May 8, 1916, the 15th day of the voyage, Worsley spots seaweed floating in the water, a sign that land is near. Shortly afterward, they see birds in quantities that suggest land proximity. The crew's spirits rise. South Georgia must be close. That afternoon, through breaks in the clouds, Worsley sees mountains on the horizon, South Georgia Island. The navigation has been successful. They have found their target after 800 miles across the Southern Ocean in a small boat under appalling conditions. But the ordeal is not over. The boat must still reach the island safely, must find the whaling station on the opposite side of the island, and Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean must still make an unprecedented crossing of South Georgia's unmapped mountain interior to reach rescue. The final approach to South Georgia brings a new crisis. A hurricane-force storm strikes just as they near the coast, threatening to drive the boat onto the rocks or to push it past the island entirely. The crew battles for survival through a night of terror, sometimes within yards of the rocky coast, sometimes driving clear, eventually finding shelter in a small bay where they can land. From this landing point on the south coast of South Georgia, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean will make a 36-hour continuous march across glaciers and mountains, terrain that no one has ever crossed before, to reach the whaling station at Stromness on the north coast, finally achieving rescue and eventually organizing the successful rescue of the 22 men left behind on Elephant Island.
As we conclude our exploration of how polar explorers navigated Antarctic ice at night, let us examine what historical evidence tells us about these practices, what navigation techniques were most critical for survival, and what lessons we can derive from studying one of the greatest survival and navigation achievements in history. The historical evidence for the Endurance expedition comes from multiple sources. The personal diaries of crew members, including Shackleton, Worsley, Ord-Lees, and numerous others, the official expedition logs and navigation records, photographs taken by expedition photographer Frank Hurley, and later interviews and memoirs from survivors. These sources provide remarkably detailed information about the navigation techniques, the survival methods, the leadership decisions, and the human experiences during the expedition. Worsley's navigation logs in particular provide extraordinary detail about the astronomical observations, the dead reckoning calculations, and the precision of his work. What can we conclude with confidence about polar navigation techniques? First, celestial navigation remained essential, even in the early 20th century, and even in conditions as severe as the Antarctic. Worsley's ability to determine position accurately through astronomical observations, despite equipment limitations, despite extreme weather, despite operating from small boats in heavy seas, was directly responsible for the expedition's survival. Second, dead reckoning skills remained critical when celestial navigation was impossible. During the months of polar night, during periods of heavy cloud cover, during the boat voyage when conditions prevented observations, Worsley relied on estimated positions based on course, speed, and drift. His estimates were remarkably accurate, suggesting both exceptional natural ability and extensive experience. Third, reading environmental signs, ice conditions, wind patterns, ocean currents, wildlife observations provided valuable navigation information that complemented instrumental techniques. Experienced polar navigators developed almost intuitive understanding of how these environmental factors affected position and drift. Fourth, navigation instruments and techniques that we might consider primitive by modern standards were remarkably effective when employed by skilled practitioners. Worsley achieved position accuracies within a few miles using a sextant, a chronometer, and mathematical tables, tools and methods that had not changed fundamentally in a century, but that remained effective. The contrast with modern navigation technology is striking. Today, GPS provides position accuracy measured in feet, updated continuously, requiring minimal skill to use.
Weather satellites provide detailed forecasts. Ice conditions can be monitored remotely using satellite imagery. Rescue capabilities exist that would have been unimaginable in Shackleton's time. But the fundamental challenges of polar navigation and survival remain surprisingly similar. Cold is still cold. It still kills through hypothermia and frostbite, still requires specialized clothing and equipment. Ice is still dangerous. It still crushes vessels, still creates navigation hazards, still fragments unpredictably. The ocean is still treacherous. Waves and storms still threaten small vessels. Navigation errors still have life or death consequences. Modern polar explorers and researchers benefit from better technology, but they face the same hostile environment and must still employ many of the same survival and navigation techniques that Shackleton's crew used. The lessons learned from historical polar expeditions remain relevant for modern operations. What made the Endurance expedition's navigation achievements particularly remarkable? First, the sheer duration and scale of the survival ordeal, nearly 2 years from becoming trapped in ice to final rescue, covering thousands of miles through ice across open ocean and over mountains, all while maintaining enough navigational awareness to successfully reach rescue. Second, the accuracy of Worsley's navigation despite severe instrument and condition limitations. The successful arrival at South Georgia after 800 miles across the Southern Ocean in a small boat represents navigation achievement comparable to the greatest feats in maritime history. Third, the leadership and decision-making that allowed effective use of navigation information. Shackleton's decisions about when to abandon ship, when to attempt the boat journey, how to organize the crew. These decisions were informed by Worsley's navigation work and demonstrate the integration of navigational knowledge with leadership and survival strategy. Fourth, the successful rescue of the entire crew without a single life lost, though several men died later from expedition-related health effects. This outcome was far from guaranteed. Numerous polar expeditions of the era ended with total loss of life or with only partial survival. The Endurance expedition's 100% survival rate represents exceptional leadership, teamwork, and skill. The legacy of the Endurance expedition extends beyond navigation and polar exploration. The expedition has become a case study in leadership under extreme conditions, in team cohesion and morale maintenance, in survival psychology, and in human endurance. Shackleton's leadership style and methods are studied in business schools, military academies, and leadership training programs. But we should also recognize what the expedition reveals about the limits of human capability and about the dominance of nature over human technology and will. The Endurance expedition succeeded not because the crew overcame nature, but because they adapted to nature's terms, accepted losses, the ship, most equipment, the original mission objectives, and focused on the achievable goal of survival. The navigation achievements were remarkable, but they also involved luck, favorable weather at critical moments, fortuitous ice drift directions, successful landfall on South Georgia, despite navigation uncertainties. In slightly different circumstances, the expedition could have ended in disaster. For modern readers interested in navigation, exploration, or survival, the Endurance expedition offers several enduring lessons. First, technical skills, navigation, seamanship, survival techniques are necessary, but not sufficient for survival in extreme environments. Leadership, teamwork, psychological resilience, and adaptability are equally important. Second, preparation and equipment matter enormously. The Endurance carried instruments, supplies, and equipment that proved essential for survival. But even excellent preparation cannot eliminate risk in truly extreme environments. Third, navigation is as much art as science. Worsley's navigation combined precise instrumental techniques with experiential judgment, with dead reckoning skills that verged on intuition, with ability to make decisions under uncertainty. Modern GPS navigation is more accurate, but requires less skill. The art has been largely eliminated by technology. Fourth, extreme environments remain fundamentally dangerous, despite technological progress. Antarctica has killed explorers and researchers in every decade since Shackleton's time, including deaths in the 21st century with modern equipment and support. The environment's fundamental hostility has not changed. The story of how polar explorers like Shackleton navigated Antarctic ice at night is ultimately a story about human capabilities and human vulnerabilities. The navigational achievements, finding positions by starlight in polar darkness, dead reckoning across hundreds of miles of ice drift, navigating small boats across the Southern Ocean to find a tiny island, demonstrate remarkable human skill and determination. But the story also reveals human vulnerability, the absolute dependence on instruments and techniques that could fail, the need for luck and favorable conditions beyond human control, the reality that even the most skilled and determined humans remain at the mercy of nature in its most extreme expressions. As we conclude our exploration, we can appreciate both dimensions: the extraordinary navigation skills that Worsley and others demonstrated, and the recognition that these skills, while remarkable, were barely adequate for survival in the Antarctic's hostile environment. The polar explorers succeeded not by conquering Antarctica, but by surviving it, not by imposing human will on nature, but by adapting to nature's unforgiving terms, and not by individual heroism alone, but through collective effort, mutual support, and the integration of navigation knowledge with leadership and survival skills. The techniques they used, celestial navigation, dead reckoning, ice reading, environmental observation, were the product of centuries of maritime and polar exploration experience, refined through countless voyages and sometimes purchased with explorers' lives. Understanding these techniques helps us appreciate both the sophistication of pre-modern navigation methods and the courage of the people who ventured into the most hostile environments on Earth with technology that we would consider primitive, but that, in skilled hands, was sufficient for survival and sometimes for triumph over seemingly impossible odds.